Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Developers End podcast, where we talk about everything in the games industry but from the eyes of two indie devs. Now today, this one is not just limited to the video game industry. We are actually going to kind of branch out, which to be fair, as we do, to the realm of all media.
As we do.
As you have seen by the really cool title that Sydney came up with, I'll give credit where it's due. So yeah, we're talking about the little tiny line that is between all of these sorts of medias, especially games, movies, TV shows, books, and a lot more than you might have thought at first.
Well, first of all, why are we talking about it?
Yeah.
So anytime we do these, us reacting to games news or whatever, I'll go through whatever the latest news in the industry is, and that's how we kind of get ideas for conversation topics. And for this one, I found an article on gamesindustry.biz, which is one of our favorites because it literally it's news for the games industry. And apparently there's a major PR firm out of the UK called DDA, which I'd never heard of, but apparently it's well known. And it looks like they're starting to branch out from before it was they did PR for film and television, and now they're branching into video games. And so the article talks about how it's a natural step for them because of things like Fallout that have just happened, or The Last of Us that did really well, or other things that have been adapted successfully into either television or movies, and how the kind of the borders between all of these different types of media are kind of slowly disappearing. And so we want to talk about it. So the first thing we kind of want to talk about was like, this is nothing new, right? Adapting games into movies and TV. It's been happening since the early 90s.
Yeah.
The funny part of it is just the fact that it's never been good.
No.
And so we wanted to talk about what are the ones that have happened in the past that were horrible, or if not horrible, at least just very poorly received.
Yeah.
And then which ones were good that came out, and maybe what's the difference between them. And then we can kind of go into how things have changed as the result of like what Marvel has done, what Disney has done, etc. So I mean, like burping. I'm sorry.
I mean, if there is, Marvel's a very good example, and we're going to get into it in a minute. But they did influence quite a lot of just cinema in general, but also how adaptations work.
I think the thing that's interesting about Marvel is I will definitely agree with Marvel has impacted dramatically the way that the television and movie industries operate. But I don't think it's in the way that most people think.
Right.
And so I definitely want to talk about that. But let's go back to the 90s and talk about video game adaptations.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to start with a movie that has a bit of a cult status, it's a Super Mario Bros. That came out in 1993.
The classic.
I'm sure I haven't seen the movie, but I'm sure if you
you haven't?
I haven't, no.
Oh my god, okay. This is one of the few that are on this list.
Clips.
This is one of the few on this list that I can actually, I've seen it a number of times. I can actually speak about this one. There's a bunch of others on the list I've never seen. I didn't play the game, don't know anything about it. This one I know, because I remember when it came out, and it's so wildly not Super Mario Brothers. Like, the only thing that it has to do with Super Mario Brothers, the only connection is the outfits in a couple of cases and the names of the characters.
Yeah.
And that's literally it. There's nothing else.
I mean, I've seen enough clips of it to kind of see why it's the problem. Like, some of the tones are really just kind of out there. Like, they got this dark dystopian tone to it, and then Goombas look really weird. Like, one of them looks like a little
the Goombas
bouncer.
are great. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, it's just why. But I mean, yeah.
I think this is going to come up a lot, but I'm sure it's true for this movie and the other movies we're going to talk about. And the reason between why some of them failed and why some of them did so well is faithfulness to the IP. And when you give somebody an IP that they know nothing about, you know, if somebody came to you and said, I want you to make a video game based on the Christian Bible.
Okay.
Would you know what to do or where to start? Or because you have absolutely no idea. You weren't raised in, you know, the
I know
Bible
Jesus
South
would be the main
of
character,
America.
but that's about it.
Yeah. So, but it's like, and I'm sure it's the same thing. If whoever it was who made this, I'm sure it was some guy to studios like, we're gonna make this super crazy popular video game. Let's make a movie about it. It's called Super Mario Brothers. And okay, we got to have a couple guys who are brothers named Mario and Luigi. Cool. Yeah. Okay, we'll just go from there without playing the game or researching it or...
Well, I'll read a little excerpt about this. It said, despite being the first major video game adaptation and based on one of the most beloved gaming franchises, it was a box office disaster.
Where's this from?
It's just
Wikipedia?
It's just Wikipedia, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and critically panned. So it had a budget of 48 million. It sold about 20. It faced criticism for its confusing storyline, lack of faithfulness to the game, and a dark dystopian tone that clashed with the colorful, family-friendly nature of the source material. The production also faced numerous problems, including script rewrites and director conflicts. So pretty much, yeah. I mean, I feel like the main reason this kind of comes up, and it is going to be one of the main topics of this podcast episode that we're doing, is they didn't take it seriously.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody took video games seriously back then. And I mean, especially when it came to a movie, it was like, you know, we just make some money out of it. I mean, there are very good examples of bad video game adaptations that just come from this mentality of, oh, it has a video game behind it. We can just look at the Resident Evil
Doom. Resident Evil.
Doom movie is a very good example as well. I mean, Alone in the Dark was another one. Oh god, yeah, that's a new one we got to talk about. But yeah, when you go back, I feel like the main reason that newer adaptations of video games are coming out and are being successful is because they're made by fans. Yeah. They respect the source material. Yeah. If they try to expand on it, they stay faithful to the rules of the world. They don't try to reinvent everything.
Here's a great example. I mean, because like I said, we've been dealing with adaptations from other media forever. Books have been adapted into movies for as long as movies have existed, I think, is we've been adapting stories from books. One of the best examples, I think, is Harry Potter. Okay. Now, arguably, the Harry Potter movies are great if you've never read the books. If you have read the books, you like the first two movies, and then everything after that's kind of meh. It's not that great. And the reason is because the directors who made those films had never read the books. And it's what happens when you sit down and you have somebody, okay, tell me about this thing that I know nothing about, and then I will use that information to make a movie.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened with a lot of these things, was give me the highlights and then I'll write a story around that. Whereas the first two movies, now arguably the first two movies, the director had never read the books before, but he read them after he got the job, and he had his kids help him because they were fans of the books. Yeah. And they helped with the casting. Anytime they cast somebody, he'd take it to the kids and be like, does this work? These people match these descriptions, and it's Harry Potter. I think it was Columbus who did the first two. Is it Columbus?
I think it was Chris Columbus. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense in my head because Chris Columbus just doesn't sound like a real name.
Not. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone director.
Yeah. Oh, it is Chris Columbus. Okay, that sounds so weird to me.
What the name? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I won't even talk about Alfonso, who did the third one, because that was the worst movie out of all of them. I was a fan of the books, but that's just how it is. Same thing with The Witcher. You know, The Witcher went from being books. The video game didn't adapt the books; it continued the story. So they were able to take a lot more creativity with it because it was a continuation.
Yeah, they used the world pretty much, but then a lot of the
and the characters.
Honestly, when I got the first book, I have it over there actually. They're very good reads. They're really short books, by the way. They're really kind of bite-sized. Especially the first one is just little bite-sized stories of Geralt. Yeah. But they took the world, they took the characters, and then they developed. And when I read the book, I was expecting to read about the game, like the quests I've done. But I realized that no, it's pretty much either before that or after it or in between.
Yeah. The first game takes place after the last book.
Yeah. And if there is one book in the series they took the most kind of inspiration from, it's the first book, which has the little tiny stories. There are some quests that I come across that are those stories, but as soon as it gets to the point where it's a novel, then you don't really, like, there's no direct adaptation. Another good example is Metro. Metro is also a book that's famous in Russia, and it was adapted into games.
If you look at the movie adaptation for The Witcher, I know I told you we weren't going to talk about Witcher, but my brain snapped onto it. Is they didn't adapt the video game; they adapted the books.
Yeah,
and they did so unfaithfully.
Yeah,
and lost their fans.
Well, and also lost their main actor, which also was very pissed off about the same problem. Yeah.
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 So I think that's really the heart of the problem in terms of like what makes a good movie adaptation versus a bad one is how faithful, not even faithful, but just how much appreciation do they have for the actual story.
How much do you care about the main? Yeah.
How much do you care?
I mean, you can to an extent, kind of relate the same problem with video game reboots or sequels. If they are not at least paying homage or respect to the source material, then there's always people who will be mad. Like, I don't know, this is a bit of a thorny example, but look at that Velma reboot that got absolutely thrashed by everybody. It had no appreciation for the character and who she was.
Yeah.
And
who any of the characters were,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, What's Her Face has a very, very good video about this. Alana Pierce. Has a very good video about this and why it's so bad. So I do recommend go watch that. But that's another very good example of just not having any love for the original character or the story or where it comes from. Now, you can expand and change things, but don't hate the original.
There's an interesting one, though, that I kind of want to talk about, which was Uncharted.
The movie by that had Tom Holland in it.
With Tom Holland, yeah.
I haven't seen that.
I was not an Uncharted fan, so I never went to go see it. But so far as I could tell, they worked really hard to be faithful to those games.
I know there were scenes in the movie that were quite literally the same
one for one from the game.
Like the one when he's hanging off the plane, that is in 3.
Yeah. So I think the question is then, why did that one not do well?
I feel like it's a mix. You can't just also do the video game, but as a movie, you have to expand on it. You have to go deeper with the story, and you have to bring in that aspect that they can't do in a game and do it in a movie.
I wonder if there were a lot of people like me who were like, well, I never saw Uncharted, or I never played it, so I don't really care about it. Whereas, like, I never played The Last of Us either, and I never played Fallout. But those shows were very interesting to me because everybody was talking about them. So, but it wasn't like they did a bad job on the marketing for Uncharted. That was everywhere when it was coming out.
It was everywhere.
So it makes me wonder why one did well versus the other. Like you said, maybe they adapted too.
I do have a theory. Yeah, I do have a theory. I think.
But so did The Last of Us. The Last of Us was almost a 1-for-1 adaptation too.
Not too much. They did change a bit with The Last of Us,
but still,
yeah.
I think what it comes down to is at that point, I think it's the genre.
That can definitely play into it too. Yeah.
The Uncharted games were meant to be Indiana Jones-esque.
Well,
right?
See, if I add a quick tiny bit about Uncharted games in general, yes, they have story. They have fantastic stories. Uncharted 4 has one of the best stories I've played in the game, and some of the best sets as well that you come across, settings. Pardon me. But at core, it's an action adventure game. You know, only like 30% of your time is the story and the cutscenes. The other 70% of the time, you're shooting at people, you're jumping from rope to rope, or you're trying to hide from enemies and shoot them because it just doesn't work. Now, with The Last of Us, it worked pretty well because at the end of it, it's a survival story. It's a survival game.
Yeah.
So
but
you can adapt those mechanics much better.
What made that story so compelling, what made that game so compelling for people was the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I think, just in the same way, I think making a movie out of the Sony one.
The Sony one?
God of War.
Okay.
Would do really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think. Because it's an RPG, you're playing through the story. But I think, like, it's the issue with Uncharted was that up until soon, there's never been an Indiana Jones game.
Mm-hmm.
So Uncharted was kind of filling a gap in video games of, I want to be Indiana Jones. I want to go through all that stuff that he does, but they couldn't use the IP, so they created a new one. But when you try to adapt that into a movie, Indiana Jones already exists in movies. Mm-hmm. We already have that. Why would I go see this one over here?
Well, I was going to bring two examples that kind of mess up a little bit with your theory of the genre.
Okay.
Two video game adaptation movies that did pretty well. Detective Pikachu and Sonic. So, Detective Pikachu, based on Pokemon's world, which arguably much more extensive than Sonic's, because Sonic's just a 2D platformer.
But I think that...
But why did those succeed and Uncharted didn't?
I think it's what we call the USP, is unique selling points.
Mm-hmm.
Because the unique selling point of Uncharted is nothing, because there's nothing unique about it.
Yeah. In the realm of movies, especially with Indiana Jones.
In the realm of movies, comparing Indiana Jones, comparing to, if you want to go straight action without the archaeology stuff, you look at Bourne Identity, you look at all these similar one male protagonist, adventure stories, Mission Impossible, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas with Detective Pikachu, nothing like that exists.
Yeah.
We hadn't seen real world Pokemon yet.
Yeah.
And that was the USP for that movie.
I guess you can say
I
the same
want
thing
to
about
see
Lego.
how they make Pokemon.
Lego movie.
Lego, the same thing. And I think that's why Legos did so well as movies, is because we hadn't seen anything like that yet. Where the Legos, where we've all been dreaming about them as, moving story in our minds since we've been building them as kids, playing the Lego. So seeing that, first it was in the video games, the Lego video games, which was really cool. And seeing all the, what was the Star Wars one I played, the Harry Potter one.
So I suppose at the end of the day,
so it's seeing it as like these different things. The other one was Sonic the Hedgehog. We all wanted to see what a real life Sonic would look like. Yeah. And at first, it wasn't good.
It wasn't good, yeah. I mean, we got to give a shout out to them for taking the criticism and actually changing the Sonic's design, because that could have been a lot worse. But at the end of it, the movie was a success. I mean, I watched it. I'm a big Sonic fan. Literally
Not only that, there's two more.
There's two more. I mean, we got Knuckles and everything coming out. Shadow's coming out in the next one.
Really, really, really killer voice actors.
Oh yeah. They got
I
big
think it's
names
helping
on there.
a lot. Yeah.
But I think if I wanted to summarize then, is that people cared to go see Detective Pikachu and Sonic, but didn't care much to go see Uncharted. They didn't have much of an interest or excitement over going to see it.
Like I said, there was no USP for Uncharted.
Yeah, there was no unique selling. But also, I think it's also I mean, it will be crazy of us not to acknowledge the fact that just fan base size, of something like Sonic versus Uncharted.
But if you
not entirely, but yeah.
But if you look at Tomb Raider, those movies did great.
Yeah.
And arguably, it's just female Indiana Jones.
I mean, it's pretty much the same genre, especially.
But the USP for that is Lara Croft.
Yes. Yeah.
people are going to go see it for her. They don't give a shit what the story is. You give me the hot woman with the big boobs riding the horse and shooting the arrows and doing all the same crazy shit that Indiana Jones did. People are going to go see that. So I think what it comes down to is the people at the top of the studios just making bad decisions, thinking that, oh, this is famous over here. If I expand on it, it's going to be famous over here. Borderlands is a great example.
Yeah.
Did horrible. And I've never played Borderlands, and I'm not going to go see it because I don't care about it. But when you do any kind of adaptation like that, the question isn't how do we get the original fans in to see it? The question is how do we expand the fan base? I've never played any of the Tomb Raider games, but I love the movies.
Yeah.
Because they got me in to go see it. Now, granted, they got me in because Gerard Butler was in the second one, but that's a whole other story. So the question is if you're going to try to widen your audience by expanding all the different forms of media that your IP touches, you have to hit the values of those different fan bases.
I'm going to use a very good example of for this. Cyberpunk Edge Runners. So it's an anime based on a Cyberpunk game
that I have never watched.
It was so good that it brought the game back to the top of the lists, and they did updates, free updates and expansions where they added bits and pieces of those characters into the game. So the anime came out, and the way it was done, by the way, the Cyberpunk one, we have to talk a bit more about Cyberpunk because it's actually kind of crazy how the adaptations worked. But essentially, Cyberpunk Edge Runners was based on the game and the world of the game. It didn't have any of the characters and stuff like that. Well, some of the characters, but not like your companions that you have in the game weren't part of it. It used the world and some of the heroes of the world, and it set a new story.
But here's the thing with Cyberpunk, is I think Cyberpunk is an edge case. Specifically because of the development, the long-term development of that IP. Which I do want to talk about, but I want to save it for the extended part.
Well, you're saying essentially like there was enough source material to pull from?
Yeah, exactly, But a similar example would be Arcane.
Oh, right, yeah.
So again, I've never played League of Legends. Never had any interest. Arcane, I watched bits and pieces of Arcane, and I didn't originally sit down to watch it because, again, never played the game, didn't think it was me. But after sitting and seeing pieces of it, I do fully intend to go back and watch the entire thing, because you don't need to know anything about League of Legends to appreciate that storyline.
Yeah.
And I think that's another part of it too, is you have to be able to develop these movies so that new people can be brought in. And I think that's what The Last of Us did really well. I think that's what Fallout did really well. As somebody who's never played a Fallout game, I thought the show was fantastic because it was interesting. It taught me the stuff. It taught me the stuff I needed to know. It set everything up really well. I think another example would be Assassin's Creed. I've played a couple of them. Now, this is probably the best example because I know a lot of people hated the movies. But from a purely monetary perspective, the movies were successful. They made back more money than they spent to make them, which is how we gauge that kind of thing, if it was a flop or not. And but the problem with trying to adapt an Assassin's Creed game is there's so goddamn many of them. And they all have completely different stories and worlds, and and the only thing that they all have in common is those two groups of people. You have the assassins and you have the Templars. The Templar. That's the only thing they all have in common.
And Animus, I suppose you can say.
Yeah, and Animus. And that's and I think the movie provided that. And it gave an interesting story that you could easily put inside of that world. So I think that's why it still did kind of well. Did they go a little hard on the Animus contraption? Yes. Was it still really entertaining? Also yes. So I'm not mad.
That's fair.
But I think kind of what we're getting to is how do you expand an IP, for anybody who doesn't know, intellectual property, from its source material into the next form of media? Because, and that's kind of what the original article was about, is the fact that this is happening more and more, whether we're sick of it or not. And I'm not talking about reboots, because that's a whole other category of let's reboot an IP and try it again. But I just mean the IP expansion. And I think even though we've talked about a lot of good cases and bad cases, things who did it really well, who didn't do it really well, I think the person that we can blame for all of this, for better or for worse, is Kevin Feige and Marvel. And when you look at what Marvel did, and we're going back to like unique selling points, right? The reason Marvel worked as a cinematic universe is because the people who knew the characters from the comics understand that part of the core of how Marvel Comics works is that they're multiverse. Is that you have all these different universes all colliding together. And that's how, and it's kind of what they've used as a way to explain why they reboot the same stories over and over again.
It worked
and
really
they
well
do
for them.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they reboot the stories over and over again because they bring in new writers and new artists. And so that became the explanation of why, you know, why do these things keep changing? Oh, it's a multiverse.
Yeah.
And then from that point, it makes sense. Okay, let's make cartoons. Okay, let's make movies. That fits within the realm of what they've already built. Kind of the same thing with Disneyland. Disneyland started this whole idea of let's bring these cartoons into real life entertainment.
Yeah.
And build this
I was going to
environment
ask
around
you,
that.
Would you consider MCU as the biggest transmedia movement yet? And probably the most successful one.
In terms of like hitting multiple types of media?
Types of media, yeah. Because I mean, because it's also, like you said, it's the one that explains it via its lore. That why there is, you know, an animated 2D Spider-Man that is really stylized, and then there's a movie of Spider-Man, and then there's this other show that looks like this, and then there's a TV show, and there's a movie.
I would say Disney probably still holds the key. And the only, it's hard because Marvel is all technically within the same universe. So are we talking universe or company?
Honestly, those are two different questions because
transmedia,
if we're talking
Disney company, would be it's Disney.
Absolutely it, yeah.
And the reason is because they have created, there's a really cool chart you can find online of all the different things that they own. And Disney focuses solely on entertainment and everything the entertainment touches. And it's not like, you know, there's a lot of like food brands that own a lot of different things, but they've kind of deviated out into weird shit. Like, we make cereal and we make soap. Like, those two things have nothing to do with each other, except that you buy them at the grocery store. Whereas Disney, everything is entertainment. Whether that's sports entertainment, video games, movies, interactive media, newspapers, news channels, it's all entertainment.
Edutainment, yeah.
And they've done a really good job of package. If it's something that involves entertaining and taking care of people, it can fit in the Disney umbrella. Marvel, everything that they do connects to each other within the same universe. So from that perspective, I'd say they have done a bigger job.
Yeah.
Because everything's all happening in the same IP.
Yeah.
Disney isn't.
But what
Disney
Marvel
has a lot of
does
IPs spread
is
out.
just under the umbrella of Disney as a whole, because that is...
Well, now, but it didn't used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just a recent thing. But that's why it works. Is now that they've got control of everything, they can bring their universe back together, and that's what makes it strong. So, but when we're talking about, you know, expanding your IP into different platforms, it makes sense for Marvel to do it. It makes sense for Disney to do it. But then you look at other people who've tried to copy them, and it feels weird. Like Universal Studios trying to copy Disneyland. And now you've got Jurassic Park and Spider-Man and like the Grinch all in one amusement park. And it feels really super weird.
A bit disjointed.
Because from my perspective, those have nothing to do with each other except for the fact that the IP is all owned by one company. But at Disneyland, when you walk from, Pinocchio's adventure to Snow White, even though those have nothing to do with each other, it makes sense because it's Disney. It's the same storytelling. It's the animation, and it works because they designed it that way.
Yeah.
So, to me, it's like, why it goes back to the original thing of don't do it unless you understand not only what you're doing but why.
Why? Yeah. The original.
And the why is so important, and it has to make sense. In order for a Detective Pikachu movie to work, we have to understand why it's going to be successful. People want to see real world Pokemon. That's it. Same thing with Sonic. That's the why. But the why for Assassin's Creed was because it's popular. That's not a good enough reason why.
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers, because it's popular, is not a good enough reason why. It has to be, we know people want to see this.
We're going to talk a bit more about go back to Cyberpunk, because there's a big discussion to have about the role-playing game to the video game to the anime to the video game again.
Yeah.
And maybe even expand a bit more towards Dungeons and Dragons, but that is going to be on our extended version of the podcast. So thank you so much for listening to us today. And if you would like to support us on Patreon,
listening to our ranting.
Yeah. Just nerding about movies and games.
Being nerds today.
But if you would like to watch the extended versions of the episodes and get these episodes earlier as well, we release these on Monday when it comes to our Patreon as opposed to the Thursday. You can do so down below, and that way you will support us directly for the work we do on SunnySide and whatever future ventures we decide to do. So thank you so much for your consideration, and we will see you next week where we talk about another episode of How to Indie. Bye.